Hi guys, welcome back to the Knitting Expat Podcast channel. My name is Mina, welcome. You can find me online as Mina Phillip on Ravelry. Knitting Expat Designs is my Ravelry shop where you can buy my patterns that I design. Sorry, I feel like I'm out of breath because I've been running around getting everything together for this video. You can find me on Instagram as Knitting Expat, and where else can you find? Oh, on Etsy you can find me as Mina Makes, is the name of my Etsy shop. And I sell some of my knitting patterns through my Etsy shop, and I also sell some artwork related stuff on my Etsy as well, so you're more than welcome to check that out. Okay, so those are the places you can find me, and I thought I would just let you know that this is not going to be your standard podcast. I do have a few finished object things that I want to share with you, but for the most part this is going to be my year-end review of 2020 and my making this year. So yeah, I hope you will enjoy that, and let's just jump right into it. I haven't actually shared a picture of these yet on Instagram, but these are my Christmas Eve cast on socks. So they're just vanilla socks with a contrasting heel and cuff. Sorry, not heel, toe and cuff. The heel is in the same yarn. And I knit this out of yarn by Bumbling Yarns. It's a UK based dyer. And so Laura is the dyer behind this, and she's the Lonely Knitter on Instagram. And yeah, so it's just her, this is her Your Filthy Animal colorway, so there's a Home Alone reference there. And the minis I use for the cuff and the toe are also from Laura as well. They were from like her holiday minis set. And the only thing I've done differently here is I've done some sort of like heel reinforcement on the back side of the sock just before I started my German short row heel. So I just did this while still knitting in the round, like I didn't do a separate heel flap. I do my mini heel flap and German short row heel as my standard, but about an inch and a half, 2 inches before I started the actual heel, I started doing my mini heel, heel reinforcement stitches just on the back half of every round, so on the back side of the sock. So I just did a knit one, slip one, but to make it a bit more decorative, I did the slip one on the front, so I slipped the yarn on the, I carried the yarn across the slip stitch across the front of the knitting rather than the back. It just makes it more decorative. You can do it however you like. And yeah, and then I also did the same patterning for the mini heel flap, and then I just did stockinette for the heel on these ones. And that's how these have turned out. These will probably eventually be for my brother. I think he'll like them. So yeah, those are the last pair of socks that I knit this year, and these were my Christmas Eve cast on, and I finished them Tuesday. Finished them on Tuesday. The other finished object I have to share with you is this sweater, which I'm so excited about. I finished this during Vlogmas, so if you were watching my Vlogmas videos, you'll have seen this being finished up. But also, I blocked it during Vlogmas, but I never showed it finished and dried. And it's all finished and dried now. I need to put it on and take some photos and stuff. Still, obviously, I need to get some proper models photos for the pattern, but I also need to write the pattern up at some point. So this was knit using Farmer's Daughter fiber yarn. Sorry, I always get that name muddled up in my head. And I used her Rambouillet base, her DK Rambouillet. Let me just get the information so I don't give you the wrong info. Yes, it's the Pishkoon DK, which I think is a US based Rambouillet yarn. That's the DK, and I used a Surrey alpaca silk lace weight yarn with it, which is her Odang base. So it's just a nice alternative to mohair. In my opinion, it's softer, and I just really like the heathered look that it gives to the yarn, and it's super warm. It is so warm and squishy, and it's got this really lovely fun textured pattern all over it. So that's that one. It's nice and heavy as well. It's got a good weight to it. So that was my last sweater that I finished this year. And another one that is going to be finished after I film this video, but it's my last finished object of the year and the last thing that was actively on my needles. So once this is seamed and bound off, that's nothing on my needles going into the new year, which is quite nice. It's something I used to do when I started. I hadn't done that for the last couple of years, but this year again, I was in a position where I was able to do that, which is really fun. So this is the feta cowl from my Cowl's book that I published earlier this year, which is really exciting. And this is just an adapted version of that pattern of the motif into a long tubular cowl. I just need to seam the ends now. And yeah, and I used a gradient of like hand spun yarns with a green DK yarn as the background colour. And I'm currently running a knit along for the Cowl's book. So if you knit any of the patterns from the book or knit anything using the motifs from the book, because the whole point of the book, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit, is to be able to knit at any gauge, a cowl at any gauge that you'd like. So the actual written pattern for the feta cowl in the book is knit out of super bulky yarn, and I did this out of DK and hand spun, which is very variable in my hand spun. So it works for all sorts. And yeah, so I've got a knit along for that running. At the moment it's going to go until the end of January, but I might extend that if people want an extension. So be sure to enter into that. There's a thread in the Ravelry group, and you can use the hashtag Persian Cowl. I'll try and remember to pop that on the screen and in the description box. And also in the launch video for the Cowl's ebook is all the information about the knit along in there as well, which I'll also try and remember to link that video in the description box below as well for you if you want to check that out, because I know not everyone has Ravelry to be able to go over there and check it out. So so yeah, that's all of that. My battery light is flashing, so I'm going to go ahead and change the battery and then we'll get back to it. Next thing I wanted to quickly talk about isn't a recent finished object. It's one that you'll have seen if you've watched the Vlogmas, is this cowl. And so this is a cowl that I knit for Layla. She requested a red cowl and she picked out this pattern. This is actually adapted from one of my existing designs called the road whipping cowl. It's one I designed beginning of last year. It was for a yarn club by Indie Untangled Yarn and Pattern Club that was published last November. And you can now buy it through my Ravelry shop at the moment. The cowl is half cabled, and then the other half is an eyelet pattern on a stockinette background, and it was designed to be able to be knit out of a single skein of fingering weight yarn. It's kind of like a one skein wonder type of pattern, and I called it road whipping mainly because it's such a memorizable pattern, and I knit it while we were on a road trip, and it was perfect road trip knitting because it's just one skein, one set of needles, and you just knit round and round until you're finished. And you can use up a whole skein of yarn because it is the tubular cowl and you just seam the ends at the end. She picked this and she only wanted the cable pattern on it, so I adapted it for that. And the yarn I was using was a DK weight yarn, so I adapted it for DK. And once again, if you have my Cowl's book, then making those adaptations is super simple because it's very much the same process of just taking your gauge and then doing the maths based on the stitch count of your pattern and adjusting your cast on number and needle size, etc. So it might sound a bit complicated, but if you've read the book and you've read the any gauge method in the book, then that would make sense to you. So essentially what I did was I went up a needle size. I think I used 4 or 4.5 millimeter needles. Actually, I can just check my notes here. I used 4.5 millimeter needles and I used a DK weight yarn, and I believe I cast on enough stitches for 7 or 8 repeats. I think it's 7 looking at the number of cables. I think it was the 7 repeats, and I knit for the whole skein, and I actually did have to add a little bit of an extra skein just to get a little bit of extra length. And this is the perfect size for Layla right now, that it's not too tight around her neck. I mean, I could probably wear it, but it would be a bit tight for me to be comfortable, but for a toddler or a small child, this is like the perfect size. So so yeah, I had a few people ask questions about this when I posted pictures of it on Instagram, so I wanted to explain what I did. So 4.5 millimeter needles and enough stitches cast on for 7 or 8 repeats, depending how wide you want it to be. Yeah, and it took just over a skein of DK weight yarn. So I think I estimated it was roughly about 260 meters, so about 300 yards of yarn. So that was that. I just wanted to mention that for that reason. And yeah, so that's a bit of the rundown of the most recent things that I've finished. And I asked a couple of days ago on Instagram if you guys had any questions for me to answer in this video. I normally do a rundown of my stats and the stuff that I do at the end of each year, and what I've accomplished knitting wise and all of that sort of stuff. So we'll run through that first and then we'll move on to the questions. Okay, So this year I finished 59 projects, sorry. I finished 59 projects this year. Actually no, technically 60 because I put one together, so 60 projects this year. Great. Out of those 60 projects, 17 of them were pairs of socks. So that's how many pairs of socks I knit this year, which is a lot less than what is normal for me. I say normal. I haven't been knitting for all that long. I've been knitting for coming up to 7 years in March. It will be 7 years since I started knitting, so almost 7 years. And I have knit a lot more socks in previous years, usually somewhere around 40 to 50 pairs a year sometimes, in some years. But 17 is definitely the least number of socks I've knit in a year since I started. Mainly because I have a lot of socks already, and my family who I knit socks for often also have a lot of socks already. So there's not a huge number of people left for me to knit socks for that don't have a lot of socks to begin with. I knit 14 cowls this year, which is not surprising because I published a book about cowls. And there were 12 patterns in the book, so 12 of the cowls I knit this year are from the book, and I knit 2 more. One was the cowl for Layla, and the other one is the cowl that I just showed you, the feta cowl that I knit, which I'm going to be finishing up after this video. I knit 3 shawls this year, which is again quite low for me. Normally I knit more shawls in a year, but that's probably because I've knit a ton of cowls this year, and I normally don't knit that many cowls. So that sort of balances out there. I knit 5 garments this year, which is pretty good, and that's actually more than I remembered. So I was looking back at my thing, I was like, oh, I knit that this year? I feel like that was like 2 years ago. Honestly, this year feels like some sort of weird time warp. I knit 19 items that are baby knits or child knits, basically. Anything that would be knit for Layla or someone younger, I consider as the baby knit category. So out of those, I think I ended up knitting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 baby garments, like child garments. Like I think I knit Layla a sweater, and I knit 4 other sort of like baby sweaters for my friends who had children recently. So 5 of those 19 are garments, and the rest were hats, socks, mittens, stuff like that. And then I have 1 miscellaneous, which was a blanket that I finished earlier this year. It was the Medea blanket from We Are Knitters. It was one of their blanket kits. They sent it to me last year. I started it last Christmas, but once it got to a certain weight, it got a bit heavy and my wrists were starting to hurt, so I put it aside for a while and I finished it off earlier this year. I actually finished it in September this year, so that was good. And it's been really nice and warm and cozy to snuggle up with in the evenings. And then I finished 1 scrappy blanket. So the 1 scrappy blanket, it was a lot I had finished was this one. This is my crochet granny stripe blanket that I started this in April of 2017. So less than 2 months after Layla was born, I started this blanket. And yeah, and it's finally finished, and I finished it in November of this year, and it's all nice and done, and it's cozy and squishy, and we love it. So yeah, that's our blanket, that's our crochet blanket for now. The only scrappy project I have going at the moment is Layla's Pinwheel scrap blanket, which I'm doing a modified DK weight version of it, which I've talked about numerous times before. But basically what I've done is I've gone up in needle size to a 4mm or US size 6. I only cast on 20 stitches, and I use DK or worsted weight yarn or fingering weight held double, and then I follow the pattern as written, just with 20 stitches instead of 30 and larger needles. It's a really easy pattern to modify based on however many stitches you want to cast on. So I've got about 40 odd squares done for that one, and I think I have about 18 squares. I've got 42 done, and I think I've got 18 squares left to go. I want to have 60 squares before I start seaming it together to get the sort of size that I want. So that's the plan. Hopefully in 2021 I can finish that blanket. It should be doable, to be honest. My goal was to have it finished by Layla's 5th birthday, and she'll be 5 in 2022, February. So I think I have plenty of time to get that done. Yeah, so that's the rundown of how many projects I've done. So 60 projects this year, and I have used up a total of 144 skeins of yarn, which is pretty awesome and really good going. Total grams used is approximately 12 kilos of yarn. have been used up this year in projects, and that's not including the scrappy projects, by the way. I don't include the scrappy blanket in that because I don't know how much it weighs or how much of the weight was crocheted this year, so that doesn't count towards any of these numbers. Total projects that I've done and the meters of yarn used is almost 29,000 meters, so almost 29 kilometers worth of yarn was knit this year. So again, pretty good going, I think. So I'm really happy with that. I genuinely thought it was going to be a lot less this year because I really haven't knit as much this year as I have done in the past. My knitting kind of slowed down a lot at the beginning, in early parts of lockdown. Looking at my finished projects totals, like from April, May, June, July, yeah, I only really finished anywhere from 2 to 3 projects a month, which is quite low for me. Normally I'm finishing like 5 or 6 projects a month. Like I do churn through them quite quickly because I normally have a couple of pairs of socks on the go, and those are usually pretty quick, and also anyway, for all sorts of reasons things slowed down this year. One of the other reasons things slowed down this year was I picked up watercolor as a hobby. I picked up watercoloring in the early parts of lockdown as a hobby, and I've really been enjoying that this year. I just have a few pieces here to share with you in case you haven't seen it before or seen some of my work before. I do mainly sort of loose abstract type of paintings. I don't go for like super hyper realistic paintings and drawings and stuff like that. That's just not what I'm into. But yeah, just got a few here. These you may or may not have seen before because I don't think I've shared them on the podcast in the past. A few of these are on my watercolor Instagram account, which is just Mina Does Watercolor. This one I'm really happy with how this one turned out. It's a little Christmassy one. This one I did back when I still had some vague ambitions of creating Christmas cards to sell this year, but this was also right around the time when I was launching my book and there was other things happening, and I was just like, nope, I just need to put a pin in that idea for this year. It's just not going to be possible. It was just too much going on. So but I really like how this one turned out, and I definitely think I'm going to be trying to get my act together to be able to publish or create and sell Christmas cards next year. Some other sort of like more Christmassy themed paintings. A lot of these were done following tutorials, just practicing and stuff like that. This one was really fun. Just a bundle of roses wrapped in newspaper. This one's just a bit abstracty. These are really recent ones. There's just what I had lying around, and normally every couple of months I sort of tidy away my paintings and stuff I want to keep or I don't want to keep, and then I put them away. I have these like files to put them away and to keep them safe and keep them flat. This one was quite fun. Again, this was following tutorial, doing just some like Christmassy ideas and stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to share a quick few of those with you guys, if you're just, you know, in case you haven't seen anything from me before. Yeah, my book. There's a mad book that I did this year. I'm really proud of it. This was genuinely such a highlight for me this year in terms of all the craziness that had been going on. This was a real sort of like light at the end of the tunnel. There was a few hiccups along the way, but we got there in the end, and I'm just super proud of this. Not just because, you know, I made a book, but also because it was just so much effort went into this, so much, it's a dream come true for me to be able to like have written and published my own book. And I did it all on my own. I don't have a publisher behind me helping me, anything like that. It was just me, my tech editor, my layout designer, and between the three of us we managed to get this book out there. So I'm really excited about this. I'll talk a bit more about this later, I think, as well, because I have some, actually, you know what, I'll mention it now because I'll probably forget later. About the book. So if you've been following for a while or you know about the book, you'll know that I did a pre-order run in November, and I had some extras that I had up for sale before Christmas, and there's none in my Etsy shop right now. I will be having some for sale later in January, hopefully. I'm waiting to see what happens with Brexit, because we're Brexiting now. I'm waiting to see what happens with that with regards to post to Europe, because I don't want to list the books for sale on Etsy and not be able to offer it for people who are buying from Europe. So I want to wait and see what's going to happen with postage, so then I can make any adjustments that I need to and make sure that I do everything correctly, because there again, I also don't want stuff to get lost. I don't want stuff to have to get sent back. I just want to make sure that I process it all correctly. So my plan is, hopefully, once I know what's happening with that, by mid-January I can have the rest of the books that I have. I have a small stock left. I think I have about 30 books left, roughly. So once I know what's happening, I'm going to list those last few books for sale, and then once those are sold, then I don't know if I will have another run done or not. That will just depend on demand. I don't know right now. So yeah, that's just a bit of news there for you. I will definitely announce it on my Instagram when the books go back up for sale again, when the listing goes live, or you can also follow me on Etsy, follow the shop on Etsy, and you'll get a notification when there's like new listings and stuff like that. So if you're interested, you can check that there. Okay, so I think we're going to move on to the questions that you guys submitted. So I won't use names just in case anyone doesn't want to be identified, but going through this, the first question: what was your favorite project that you knit, spun or crocheted this year? I'm not sure, to be honest, because I love everything that I've knit, and I love everything that I've spun and crocheted. Well, I say crochet, but I've only crocheted this blanket, so this would be my favorite crochet project from the year because it was my only crochet project from the year. In terms of spinning projects, I didn't actually spin a huge amount this year. I kind of set my spinning wheel aside in early lockdown stages and didn't really pull it out again until a month ago. So there hasn't been a huge amount of spinning this year. Hopefully next year that will not be the case, because I'll be running the spin and make along again with Grace, and also Mars from Hey Brownberry this time. So Grace is from Bebble's Traveling Yarns, and Mars from Hey Brownberry are going to be my co-hosts for the spin and make along next year, which is going to be super fun. So stay tuned for more information about that. And in terms of knitting project, I think I'm just really happy with all the sweaters that I've put out this year, the designs I've published. I do love all of them, to be honest. Like, they're all, if I didn't love them, I wouldn't have made them, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm sorry, I can't really pinpoint a specific design, but I do love all of them. The next question is there anything you haven't designed yet that you would like to try? That's an interesting one. I think, I'm not sure. I do have an idea in the works for a brioche or fisherman's rib style garment that I would like to do at some point, and I have the yarn for it. I just need to sit down and do the maths for it. So maybe does that count as something that I haven't done that I would like to do? Yeah, I guess it does, because it's a technique I've not used in a garment that I would like to do. So yeah, I guess that's one. Oh, and then someone's asked, how do you use your yarn knitting spreadsheets? Okay, yeah, so if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I don't really use Ravelry project pages anymore. I did up for a couple of years, and then I stopped because it just got a bit too much, and because I'm a fairly prolific knitter and I knit a lot of projects, like I said, I got 60 this year, and that's a low number for me. On average it's like closer to 100 per year, so I'm fairly prolific in that regards. So keeping up with project pages on Ravelry is it's just too much. It's just too much work. I don't have time for it. So I use a spreadsheet on Excel on my computer, and it's available whenever I need it. And yeah, so that's what I do. So I'm going to quickly take you off the thing I've got you perched on and show you how I use it. Okay, so it's just a really basic spreadsheet. I have my reference number for like the project number that it is, project name, needles that I've used for it, the yarn that's been used. I usually up at the company name, and then the colorway or the name of the base or something, date started, date ended, total grams used, which I then figure out from that I then figure out how much yarn was used in meters. Like, you can do that in yards if you prefer. I do it in meters. And then also how many skeins were used. Ignore this section, this was from when I was designing the cowls, and I wanted just a quick reference for the needle sizes that I used. And then the color coding here, this is again just for personal curiosity. I color code based on what sort of different projects I've knit, and got the tally there for the total, and also keep track of like scrap blankets as well underneath. So that's just the general projects tab. And then I have a yarn spreadsheet, and this is all highlighted because this is everything that I have in my stash as of the end of 2020, which actually isn't a huge amount, which I'm really happy about. I have 92 skeins in my stash at the moment, and I have like little formulas at the top here that will tell me I have 92 skeins, and it tells me how many how many meters that is and how many grams that is. So I have about 8 kilos of yarn, 26 kilometers worth of yarn as well. And yeah, so I'm really happy with that. And then anything that comes new this year will come in under here. It won't be this highlighted color. I'll probably pick a nicer color for it than this, but anyway. And here I just have what yarn weight it is, the company or the dyer, the colorway name, how many grams are there per skein, and then how many skeins I have in my stash, how many grams I have in total meterage, how much of that has been used, how much is left over, how many skeins have been used, and how many I have left over. So this just helps me keep a running track of what's going on. And then sometimes I'll do a monthly, how much I've used each month, how much is new. I kind of lost my way with this side of the spreadsheet this year. I didn't really keep up with it, so that's why there's nothing in this from this year that's been used. I've kind of got it all set up fresh to use from 2021. So it doesn't show as anything having been used yet because it's what's currently in my stash going into the new year. And yeah, so that's how I use my spreadsheets, and it's just helps me keep track of my stash. I did have one for hand spun, but I think I've deleted that now. I need to create a new one because there again I lost track of it and it was all really disorganized, and I just didn't want to deal with that right now. So yeah, that's how I do my spreadsheet. I think if you go onto my Ravelry page, which there's a link to that down below, my Ravelry group page for the podcast, there is a thread where I have a link to download this spreadsheet if you would like a copy, like a blank copy to fill in yourself, to use for yourself. So you can definitely go check that out. Next question, if you are a new sock knitter as I am, what pattern is best to start with? I would always say like a vanilla pattern would be fairly basic, like just a plain sock would be a good place to start. And if you're unsure of the techniques, it's really great to start with a heavier weight sock, like a DK or worsted weight sock. I know Tin Can Knits has the Rye pattern, sock pattern, which is a really basic cuff down, heel flap, gusset, a very traditional sort of sock construction. I also have 2 vanilla sock patterns available. One is free, one is paid for. The free one just comes with a very standard sort of generic short row heel, wrap and turn short row heel included. The paid for one comes with my mini heel flap and German short row heel instructions, and there's also a video tutorial linked in the pattern for the German short row heel as well. So if you wanted that, that's also an option. Then I also have, if you don't want just plain socks, you want something with a bit of patterning as well, just so it's not, because maybe you find plain vanilla boring. I also have 2 Beyond Vanilla sock collections of patterns. Each collection has 4 patterns in them, and those are very simple sort of knit purl techniques, really basic, sort of like it says, Beyond Vanilla, like just a step above a plain sock. And those also have that heel, my German short row heel included with them. And also I would highly recommend Very Pink Knits on YouTube. She has lots of great tutorials. She has lots of sock tutorials for all different types of methods, toe up, cuff down, 2 at a time, 1 at a time, however different methods you want. Like, she has lots of different variations on it. And her channel is how I learnt to knit. A lot of the time, if I need a refresher on a knitting technique, or I need to reference a knitting technique in my patterns, like sometimes I'll link video tutorials to specific techniques in my patterns that I publish, and I always check to see if she has a tutorial for that technique, and I inevitably always link her techniques because they're always really well just laid out and explained. And really, it's the reason why I don't do a lot of knitting tutorials on my channel, because to be honest, she covers a lot of the things that I would do, and I don't see the point of recreating something that someone else has already done and has done probably better than I could. So I highly recommend that channel as well. Another question about favourite design I did this year. I don't know, can I cheat and say this? This whole book was my favourite thing that I've done this year. It's not one design, it's technically a book of designs, but it's definitely a favourite. And then another question, what was your favourite moment of Christmas 2020? Probably just the sheer excitement on Layla's face, and just the excitement that she has like throughout the month of December about Christmas, about Santa, about all of it, and just, you know, just getting to relive it through her, as it were, like as a child, and the magic of it, of Christmas as a child, even with all the rubbish that's been going on this year and all the things that weren't able to happen the way we would have liked. We were still able to do a lot of the things that we wanted to do in the run up to Christmas, and we were able to make it as magical as possible for her, which was lovely, and she absolutely loved it. Someone's asked for my make 9 for next year. I don't do make 9s, mainly because I pretty much exclusively knit my own designs. Pretty much, typically when I knit something, I'm designing something, and if I'm not designing something, I'm re-knitting one of my existing patterns, either as a gift or as part of a knit along or whatever other reason. We've got another question. Of all the places you have lived, what is your favourite place? That's interesting, because I think different places have had different things that have been good and bad about them. I think, like, I love living in Vancouver. I would love to go back to Vancouver someday, but you know, the downside of Vancouver is it's so far away from our family here in the UK. Like, Vancouver is a long flight. It's like 10-11 hours, and that's a direct flight, so it's a long way to be away from family and stuff like that. So as much as I would love to go back to Vancouver and live there for a while again, it's just, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Same again with New York. We would love to go back to New York at some point, although I think now with the way things are, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, and I'm not sure we're in a rush to go back to New York. It would have to be the right opportunity, the right timing and all of that. Right now we're just not we're not pursuing that as an option, but it's somewhere I would love to go back to. Dubai even, like, we lived in Dubai for a while, and by the end of our time there we were definitely getting a bit tired of the bureaucratic red tape and all the hoops you have to jump through just to get anything done. It is it's a fun place to visit. It's a harder place to live, I think. There again, it just depends on what you're looking for. It's actually not a bad place to raise a family. There's a lot going for it. But I think Perry's not fond of the idea of going back to Dubai. I would like to go back to Dubai. We've got lots of friends there. It would be easy to settle back in to a life there. We still know lots of people who live there. But there again, I don't think that's something that we're going to be considering anytime soon. And I think there was another question about whether or not we were going to be staying in the UK long term. Can't remember. So yeah, there was another question. Do you plan on staying in the UK long term? At the moment, yes. At the moment, we are planning on staying here. We don't have any immediate what's the word? We don't have any immediate thoughts or plans to try and go somewhere else. We're always open to it. And I've always said to Perry, if an opportunity comes along, don't discount it. You know, let's talk about it. We'll see if it pans out, or we'll see if it's something we're even interested in. And there have been things since we moved back. There have been things that have cropped up, and it's been like, oh, that would be interesting. And then you kind of like look into it a bit more, and then you're just like, well, actually, no, that's probably not the right thing for us right now. Or maybe it was, but then it just didn't pan out for other reasons. So, you know, we're always open to opportunities that come along, but we're not actively pursuing any. Yeah, we actually just submitted our application for Layla's school places, because she'll be starting school in September, so that's really exciting. We've just submitted our application for her school place, which is really nerve-wracking but also exciting. Someone's asked, would you like to pursue your art as you're so good? Thank you so much, that's very kind of you. I'm really not that great, but I do enjoy what I do, and I have pursued it to the point where, you know, I've created some greeting cards and note cards and stuff out of my artwork, and those are available on my Etsy at the moment. I will probably do some new ones with some different designs some point in the new year, but beyond that, right now, I'm not sure that I'm going to put too much pressure on myself to create art for like commercial purposes, for like basically to sell artwork and stuff like that. I will add things as and when stuff comes up that I want to sell, or I feel is good enough to sell, or whatever. But I'm not going to put pressure on myself to make it into like a business type of thing like I have with my designing. I kind of want to keep that as like my hobby as it were. And you know, if I can do some things on the side with it, then great. Upcoming projects for 2021, knitting plans or collaborations and stuff. And yes, there are a few things coming up in 2021 which are really exciting. So I've already mentioned the spin and make along, so that's not really design related, but that is something that's coming up, and that's going to be something that's going to go for most of the year, so it's going to be quite a big thing, which is really exciting. And I've got the Knit With Me series, which I will be hopefully launching in January, for my palette cleanser shawl, which will be, like I said, hopefully starting soon. That's going to be coming this month. We've got the got a sock club that's going to be starting soon. That's probably going to start in March, I think, possibly April. It just depends on a few things, but I'm planning on having it start in March at the moment. I have sat down and I've worked out, I've got a theme, I've picked out all the ideas, I have like stitch patterns. Like this all happened in like the last couple of days. Like my work week this week, because Layla's been at preschool this week, so I've actually had a work week this week, which is a nice surprise. But I sat down, I came up with ideas, which thankfully it's blown out, so you can't really see anything on the paper. But I've gone through and I don't know how much you can see, but I've gone through and I've sort of planned out the different stitch motifs and how it will work across all the different sizes. I mean, this will make no sense to anybody, but it makes sense to me, which is important. Picked out like stitch patterns, made my modifications to how they're going to look and how they're going to work. And I've actually been spending the last couple of days, you know, once I did all of that, from yesterday I started creating all the charts on Excel, because I actually find that's the first step for me, is creating all the charts and then drafting all the patterns and stuff like that. And the reason I'm doing all of those first is because I still need to contact yarn dyers that I want to work with for this collection, and I'm trying to be respectful of people's time and people wanting to have a break between Christmas and New Year, and everyone isn't like me who is spending their time working between Christmas and New Year because they have ideas they can't get out of their head. So I'm trying to be respectful and not encroach on people's time off, or, you know, let people relax. So once we hit the new year, I think next week, I'm going to start contacting a few people about collaborations or collaborating on these ideas that I have for this sock club, and hopefully get the ball rolling with that, so that I can at least start publishing patterns from March. I think I will probably have pre-orders going up probably from around towards the end of January, probably the last week of January. I'll have pre-orders going up, and then the pre-order will be available all throughout February, which will be like a heavily discounted price for the whole club if you're buying it up front before the first pattern is published. So that's the best way to get the best deal on the price. And then once the first pattern is published, the price will go up a little bit, and then once the last pattern is published, the price will go up to whatever its final sale price is going to be on Ravelry. So that's kind of how I've done all my clubs in the past, and I find it's a good way to make it affordable for as many people as possible. And if you like my designs in the past, my sock designs in particular, then you will enjoy this club, I hope. It's going to be a range of different skills covered in it, from basic knit purl pattern with nothing super complicated at all, so very easy for beginners. There's going to be some cabling, small cables and some bigger cables, but nothing scary. There's going to be some twisted stitches, there's going to be some lace work, just a little bit of everything, just a nice little sprinkle of stuff. And I personally don't think any of these are going to be super complicated. I think if you are up for a nice little challenge, I definitely think the later, I think I'm trying to organize it so that the quote-unquote easiest patterns or the least complex patterns are earlier in the sock club, and they will gradually get more and more like leveling up as you go through the club, so that by the time you get to the end, if you've knit all the other ones in the run up to it, you'll have the confidence to be able to knit it without any problems. So it's kind of like a improve your sock knitting skills, or just knitting skills in general, over the course of a year. Doorbell. So that's the plan for the socks anyway. So there's going to be 8 patterns in the collection, so stay tuned for more information about that. I'm really excited about it. I have 2 sweaters that I designed and knit this year, including the one that I showed you earlier. that I still need to write up the patterns for. So that's also going to be coming next year. I'm hoping to get those patterns written up, drafted, tech edited, and test knit so I can publish them in time for like autumn, end of summer, early autumn sort of time. Because they're both heavier weight, warmer sweaters. I really don't think there's much point publishing them in the beginning of summer or middle of summer. They don't typically do as well as when I publish them later in the year, and that's just the way it is. Which is fine because it takes the pressure off me trying to get the patterns written up, and it means I can give my testers more than like plenty of time to knit them up and stuff like that as well, which I always prefer to do. And speaking of sweaters, I have 2 sweater quantities that were sent as yarn support, which I got about this time last year. One I received just before the new year, and one I got actually at Vogue Knitting Live in January of 2020. So those 2 I would like to get knit up and get the patterns drafted and stuff, either to be released at the end of next year or at the end of 2021 or at the beginning of 2022. So that's also on the cards, but that's more long term. I had a question from someone about if I had any more books or collections in the pipeline, where I just talked about the socks. And someone else asked, was the book creation experience good enough to start another book project in the future? Yes, I would absolutely love to do more books in the future. I think for the next book, I would actually really love to work with a publisher, because obviously I did this one entirely off my own back and it was great and I really enjoyed the experience. I learned a huge amount from it. I know there's a lot more that I would have done up front. If I knew what I knew now, I would have done a lot more planning up front for having an actual physical book, and not having it in my head that people wouldn't want a physical book, because for some reason I just had it in my head that I didn't think anyone would be interested in buying a physical book from me. I don't know why. I really don't. But there's a lot of self-esteem issues associated with that thinking process. But anyway, I would love to work with a publisher. I think that would be another really interesting learning experience, because I've obviously never done that before. So we'll see. I don't have any plans to start anything immediately. I just think the first 3-4 months of 2021 are already stacking up to be quite busy with the plans that I have for the sock club, for the Knit With Me series I want to do. We're going to be kicking off the spin and make along. I have the 2 sweaters I've already designed that I need to write up, and you know, there's lots of things happening like all at the beginning of this year. Plus I'm going to be teaching with Vogue Knitting Live in January in a couple of weeks, and then I'll probably be doing the next few months with them as well. So yeah, there's just a lot happening in the next few months. So what was the best memory and worst memory of coronavirus in 2020? I think one of the worst memories has to be the day Christmas got cancelled. And I say that because I think that was really, for me, the moment where it was like it all just became like just too much. Up until that point, everything that had happened this year, I was like, okay, like I can deal with this. Okay, I can deal with this. I can deal with this. Like, okay, like it's not easy. It's not fun. Like it's rough. It's tough. It's whatever. But I can deal with it. Like we can, you know, it has to be done. I understand. Like it's I get it. We all have to do what we can, sort of thing. And even with Christmas getting cancelled like less than a week before Christmas, I still understood, but it was almost like the straw that broke the camel's back. And that was literally the first time I cried about the whole COVID thing this year. Up until that point, I was like, you know, it's fine. It's what's necessary. It's fine. You know, we'll get past it. And I think because all throughout the year, I always had this idea that, you know, if we get things under control, if things are under control enough, then we can still have a Christmas. We can still see some family. We can still do something. So then when we thought that's what we had, and we were, everyone, or at least how I felt, like we were all working towards that that goal in mind of like having that thing that we were looking forward to, and then having it ripped away literally days before Christmas was not fun. I mean, I personally think if they were going to do that, and you know, I think the science was there to say that that wasn't going to be a necessary thing, that, you know, we went into lockdown for the whole month of November. I personally don't think the government should have let the country come out of lockdown. I think they should have just been like, there is going to be no Christmas this year. You're not going to be able to see family at Christmas. And I think if they had made the decision earlier, not waited until like 5-6 days before, it would have been a lot easier for people to wrap their heads around and come to terms with it, and it probably wouldn't have felt like such a shock at the time. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm obviously very grateful that we're healthy, that our family's healthy, that and all of that, but that doesn't take away from the disappointment and the sadness of getting news like that so close to Christmas. Anyway, all that being said, we are currently in tier 4 lockdown in the UK, I mean where we are, so we basically can't do anything right now, which is fine, and to be fair, right now it's kind of what's necessary. So that was the worst memory, I think, probably, you know, the day when it all just became a little bit too much. But the best memory, funnily enough, is probably from the early days of lockdown when Layla was first at home and we were getting a lot of quality time with her. I still had the energy to come up with new ideas and things to do with her. The weather was starting to get better, so we could spend time outside in the garden. And then when it came to just spending more quality time with Layla this year has definitely been a positive, and also writing the book. Those are probably 2 really good memories from this year. Publishing that book, all the support from you guys, and also just getting to spend some really good quality time with Layla. Obviously more so than we would have done as a family had we, you know, had this year not happened the way it did. So, you know, we try and look on the bright side of things. I created a 2020 sort of review video using like the 1 second every day app on my phone, and I did that yesterday for the whole year. It took a long time, but I did it. So I'm going to add that video to the end of this whole thing if you guys want to watch it. It's about 5 minutes long, and you know what, watching that video just shows, you know, it's more of a highlight of some of the nicer things, the good things that happened this year, the fun that we were able to have, and it doesn't focus on the negatives, which is quite nice. It's obviously there's been a lot of negatives this year. Everyone has been dealing with all of that, but at the same time, you know, it's also nice to remember the good things that have happened this year as well. It's not been all bad, it's not been all terrible. There have been good moments throughout the year. And I think I have one last question to answer, which was, how do you juggle working from home and maintaining a work-life balance? I can't do it. I'll let you in on a secret, I can't do it either. I think a work-life balance in a year like this year, when childcare and stuff like that has been a bit hit and miss, I think it's just something that's just not possible in the way that we would like it to be, especially when you've got kids like Layla's age who need a lot of supervision, or even younger, who need a lot of supervision, who need a lot of play and things like that. And you know, especially if they're an only child, they don't have another child in the home to play with, they don't have a sibling to play with, so there's a lot of, you know, a lot put on the parents to play with the kids, which is fine. Obviously you're the parent, that's your job, but it's hard when you're used to having a certain number of days per week to be able to do your work, and then to not have that all of a sudden can feel quite what's the word, can feel quite hard to deal with sometimes. And it did get hard for me at some points throughout the lockdown. We've been very lucky that from June Layla's preschool opened up again, and she's been at preschool since June. So for us it was really the first 3 months ish of the lockdown that were really hard, where we didn't have that preschool time. But since then it's been a lot easier, and also as she's gotten older she's gotten much better at like independent play and stuff. So I find sometimes I can squeeze in a bit of work when she's doing some of her own things. But during the beginning part of lockdown, when she was home all the time, Perry and I basically just had to split our days. So I would work for a few hours in the morning, and then around lunchtime we'd switch, and then he'd work all afternoon and evening, and I'd be with Layla. So we just sort of split our day as best as we could, and it worked well for us because at the time Perry had a lot of US based clients, so most of his work hours were in the afternoon when he had meetings and stuff anyway, so he was able to be a bit flexible. But so yeah, I mean, it's hard, honestly it's hard. I've had weeks where I've just not gotten a lot of work done at all, and you know, I've learnt this year to not be hard on myself, to not to not put myself down for not being super productive all the time whenever I have some spare time, or whenever Layla is at preschool. I try really hard not to make myself feel guilty, because everyone is just struggling to get through this year right now, and nothing good is going to come from making yourself feel bad. Like, yes, could I earn more money if I worked more this last year? Absolutely. Would I be happy? Probably not, because I'd probably be miserable as a result of trying to work, force myself to work when I didn't feel like it, or force myself to work when I was having a bad day or just needed a break. So I've tried to be really, what's the word? Try to be more gentle with myself in terms of the amount of pressure I put on myself to do things. I think there was one point where I was really stressing about a deadline that I had, and Perry turned to me and he was like, who's giving you this deadline? And I'm like, me! I give myself this deadline. And he's like, what? Can you not move it? Can you not change it? You set yourself this deadline and now you're stressed about it. Change the deadline. Which sometimes, yes, was fine and I would do that. But sometimes it's like, no, well, now I've announced this date publicly to everybody. For example, the book launch. I was like, no, I've now announced the launch is going to happen on this particular day. I have to do it now, because I don't want to backtrack and cause confusion by changing the date. I know for the majority of people would be fine, but I also know that it would cause confusion, and I always try to be clear, to the point, and not keep changing my mind on things as much as possible to help prevent that sort of confusion from happening. But it was just really funny. There was a few times in the year where I'm like, no, I have this deadline. I'm like getting really stressed about it. Not necessarily this year, but in past years. And then Perry'd be like, well, who set this deadline? I'm like, me, I set my own deadlines. And he's like, can't you just extend it? I mean, yeah, like I said, sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not. And yeah, like, honestly, it's really hard. Work-life balance is one of those things that is just this, I kind of sometimes think of it as an urban legend. It doesn't really exist. You just do the best you can with what you have. And at the end of the day, I try to remind myself, Layla's only going to be little once. You know, she's going to grow up. She's going to eventually want to do her own thing. She's not going to want me around all the time. And, you know, I try to make the most of the time I do have with her. Someone asked, how do you find balance between knitting for work and knitting for fun? That's easy. For me, knitting for work is fun. So that's the answer. I find designing fun. If I didn't, I probably wouldn't be doing it. I find the process of designing fun, and then I find the process of knitting up those designs incredibly fun, because it's really, really rewarding to see the thing that you've designed and you've come up with in your mind play out in front of you in your knitting, and to see it come to life. So I don't really find it a chore. If I want to just knit for fun, in the sense of like not having to use my brain to come up with a design and do all the maths and stuff for it, then I typically end up knitting either vanilla socks or a simple pattern sock, or like baby knits and stuff like that. So that's basically it. But as I mentioned before, I don't typically knit a lot of patterns by other people. It's just not what I'm able to do right now. Okay, I think we have covered everything that I planned on covering today. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've a feeling it's going to be quite long, but if you'd like to see a little bit more, then you can stay tuned and see the little recap video at the very end. So thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you guys in 2021. I hope you guys have a happy and healthy new year, and here's to a better year ahead. Imagine the first half of 2021 is going to be pretty rough, a lot like what we're going through now, but I'm hopeful that from like spring, summertime onwards, things are going to start to get better. So yeah, anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me today. I'll see you guys again soon. Take care. Bye.
Daddy. very hot.
Contingency plans. Well, what a good idea.
Good to go.
Having a little nap.
Cheese. Nom, nom.
On this.
And do different things with
This is today.
Yep.
The red one. We're coming. Yay! Thank you very much.
Out.
I decided to watch it.
One more.
Is the reading.
By myself. Cheese. Going to fish school.
Well, that's cheap. Like,
Do this.
You look beautiful, aren't you?
Look at Auntie Mina, say tea.
Recounts in the past.
Good girl.
It's got this. This is the full bed.
Writing the possibility.
Molly!
So difficult.